Wars is such a musical franchise that it needs its own video. So George Lucas' preferred term for Star Wars genre isn't actually sci-fi. He likes space opera better, and he talks about the story in terms of being a drama.
I used to watch a serial on television called Adventure Theater, and they had Flash Gordon Conquers the Universe on it, and I used to love that. So I went off and wrote my own space opera.
So what is an opera, really? And why does that term better describe Star Wars than, say, sci-fi? Well, opera has been around a long time, like 400 years long. And it's evolved a lot over all that time. It started in 1597 with a new work called Daphne by Jacopo Peri. It's kind of a popular line to rediscover musical things from the Greeks. And well, Peri was part of a school of thought that said modern music, modern for the time, wasn't as good as the ancient Greeks' music. Not that they knew what that even sounded like. Honestly, we're just starting to figure that out now, through painstaking cross-disciplinary research. They figured out basically the instruments, pitches, and essentially the rhythms, but not necessarily definitively, or performance practice or any of that kind of stuff, so sit down, Jacopo. Peri and like-minded musicians of that time and place didn't necessarily know how to take music where they thought it should go, so they kind of had to make it up. They ended up creating a new sound, which would give birth to the first operas of Peri, Monteverdi, and others to follow. Pretty quickly, opera took off all over Italy, and Europe too. And soon it wasn't just an entertainment for the aristocracy and ultra-wealthy, but something that the public could get a ticket to see. Before now, music and theater were largely separate. There might have been some music in the theater, during a set change, say, but the lines of the play were spoken, not sung. And popular music of the time was largely songs for multiple singers called madrigals, which the church had previously regarded as filthy, low people music with its blah harmony. Its instruments, ugh. There was some crossover. Sometimes madrigals were based on tunes from church music, eventually a kind of harmony called organum was allowed into church music, etc. But my point here is that madrigals and the kind of music that composers were writing for opera were two different things. Opera focused on the solo singer, usually accompanied by just one or a handful of instruments, binding the words and music together to tell a story, usually about grandiose subjects like the old pagan gods and myths or kings and emperors. Skipping over so much history here, but eventually, opera came to be known for its giant stories and larger-than-life everything. French grand opera, for instance, was especially well known for insane special effects, like, no joke, a literal volcano eruption on stage. The music also grew in scope and drama, and by the time we're up to the 19th century, which is roughly the style that John Williams writes the music for Star Wars in, we've got massive orchestras in the works of Strauss, Mahler, Berlioz, Wagner, Verdi, and others. In this way, we can sort of start to see what Lucas means when he calls Star Wars a space opera. The story is larger than life, it's mythic material which he just put in space, which is itself kind of a fantastical setting anyway. And the music largely drives the story as much as anything. Here's Lucas on that.
The Star Wars films are basically silent movies, and they're designed as silent movies. Therefore, the music has a very large role in carrying the story, more than it would in a normal movie. Most movies, the story is carried by the dialogue. Star Wars films, the music carries the story. So that the music is extremely important, just as it would be in a silent movie. That connective tissue of how you get from, there's a lot of very quick transitions in Star Wars. You're moving from scene to scene and scene. It moves very fast. And without that music there to smooth it out and take you from point A to point B in a sort of elegant way, it becomes very jerky and confused, and the story doesn't work very well. The film doesn't work very well.
So I can definitely see where he's coming from on this. There are lots of similarities. Although, I might asterisk this a little bit. At this same time, many of these composers were writing symphonic pieces called tone poems, where they would write a symphonic piece without any singing, but they would still have specific story and character in mind. In this kind of work, they would try to reflect the characters with sounds from the instruments and rely on musical tropes and conventions to tell the audience the story. They would also write a bunch of program notes so you could follow along and sort of figure it out while you listened, but that's neither here nor there. Take this example from Berlioz' Symphonie Fantastique, where he makes the Old Witches theme kind of a messed up clarinet solo. He takes a sort of ploppy, happy melody and corrupts it with all these appoggiaturas, basically extra notes, kind of grace notes, and hardly in-tune affect. Here, he has made a motif which tells us a lot about the character without the character actually coming out and singing. Now, take pieces like the Lincoln Portrait by Aaron Copland, where a speaker reads letters of Abraham Lincoln's over Copland's musical score. Or Peter and the Wolf by Sergei Prokofiev, where the famous children's story is read aloud over an orchestra. I think these more closely match what's happening in Star Wars, functionally speaking. Nobody sings in Star Wars, obviously, and opera is not the only genre with larger-than-life stories to tell. But Star Wars does still utilize romantic music as a driving force for the whole film, underneath a scripted performance. Seem like anything else, maybe, we've just talked about, potentially? In truth, Star Wars seems to me to be somewhere in between opera and a tone poem. I get it though, it's probably apples and oranges to a non-classical musician like George Lucas, and space opera does get fairly close to the idea. Space, tone, poem, it doesn't really have the same ring, does it? That's not to say there aren't other similarities. A young hero wants to go out and adventure, an apprentice, teacher, magical warrior duo, plotting the lives of the mundane heroes below, surprise family connections / parentage, brother and sister, affection, the mentor being betrayed by his underling who self-immolates and tears everything down, destroying the whole world they're standing on. I mean, might sound like I'm talking about Star Wars still, but I'm actually hitting some key plot points of Wagner's ring cycle of operas. They're more typically compared to The Lord of the Rings, since they both draw heavily on the German Norse mythology and a magical ring, but it just goes to show how well Star Wars fits into the realm of mythic fantasy writing. Just in space. So there are stronger and weaker links to opera in Star Wars, and a lot of angles to see it from. But whether or not you buy Star Wars as operatic, it's a fun thing to explore what's actually happening with the music in Star Wars and its relationship to music history. And in the sense that it's mass appeal entertainment in its own time, it sort of has the right spirit to harken back to something we could call operatic. Thank you for taking the time and watching. If you liked the video, please do hit the like button and share it with your friends. And be sure to subscribe so you won't ever miss new posts. What do you think, though? Knowing about tone poems, would you still call Star Wars a space opera? Let me know in the comments. Hope you have an awesome and operatic day.